Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Prophecy Roundtable. I am your host, Dr. Douglas Hamp. I'm excited to be here tonight because we are going to talk about the three rebellions and the three prison releases. Now, this is something that was inspired by Dr. Michael Heiser, the late Dr. Michael Heiser. And we have one of his colleagues here in his own right, Ronn Johnson, who is going to help us navigate some of Dr. Heiser's ideas, obviously some of his own ideas, and we're all going to talk about Scripture. All right, so what are these rebellions? Well, we can certainly start with the first one, right? Back in the garden, right? Then you have, the Nephilim, that whole thing in Genesis chapter 6. And then you got this other crazy thing that happened with the Tower of Babel. And then, of course, we have future events, and those are the three prison releases. So I'm excited to dig into these things. Hey, Ron, it is really great to have you. We're glad that you could join us this evening.
Thank you, Doug. Good to be here.
Other amazing co-hosts, Scott and Joel. So awesome, guys. Yeah, fantastic. So this should be a lot of fun. So maybe tell us give your version of what are the three rebellions and the three prison releases, so we can get started on those ideas.
Sure. And Mike and I talked about these things over the years, that we knew each other. We had parallel lives, as it were. He was, because of his role at Logos, it was prodigious what he put out, and so proud of him for all that work. I was pastoring and teaching in a Bible college at the time, and we talked quite often. We'd often get together at conferences and compare notes mentally, or even just physically, look at what we had written and stuff. When it came to the three rebellions, here they are. It's the Genesis 3 idea, and Mike was pretty strong on that the event of the serpent, who did in his mind represent a divine being, likely a member of the divine council, he would say, but yet he opposed God, and he introduced death and sin into the human race through this event in Genesis 3 with Adam and Eve, also severing humanity's direct relationship to God. That's where, and let me stop there. This is a good example where Mike took a tack that was very specific. I tend to still take a tack that's less specific than that. So the first rebellion, Genesis 3, I think there are options. Mike's option was to take it as a divine rebellion, not only of this member of God's divine council that approached Adam and Eve, but also that Adam and Eve participated in some sense, and they lost, or they severed their relationship to Yahweh. My discussions with Mike was such that I said to him, and I'll say it to you guys, I don't see Genesis 3 personally severing human relationship to God. In other words, I think Adam and Eve, in my opinion, this is just me, left the garden with only one punishment, as it were, and that would be not able to eat of the tree of life. Thus, they were introduced into the world of death that had already been going. In other words, a carbon-based life form, whether it be a human, animal, plant, whatever, has natural rhythms to it. Thus, death was a natural part of the creation of God, in my view. And that was progressing outside the garden with plants, animals, and even humans, and that Adam and Eve then and their children were introduced into that world and left the Garden of Eden, thus becoming dying. In other words, they entered the world of death because they had no access to the tree of life. So the first rebellion is the Genesis 3, and at least it says that there was, at that point in early human history, Adam and Eve level anyway, that there was at least one divine being who was antithetical to the way of Yahweh. Again, a created Elohim, we would call it, who through a serpent spoke to Adam and Eve. So that's the first rebellion. The second one is the Genesis 6 one. Again, does it need to be a specific rebellion? Again, Mike and I differed a little bit on this. He would say that the story, of course, is divine beings, the B'nai Elohim, sons of God, or you could just say the class of divine beings of that time period, some of them anyway. They left their proper domain, came into the earth somehow, took upon themselves human bodies, somehow cohabited with women, somehow again, and had children. That would be those Nephilim, those giants, those hybrid beings that we know of. This was an act of rebellion, of course, in one sense, that brought not just the flood. The key to Genesis 6, of course, is that this is why the flood was coming by Yahweh's design, to not rid the world of just general sinfulness, but because of this terrible act of rebellion on the side of these beings. The Book of Enoch, again, here's where that Enoch tradition expands upon this idea, and you have the Watchers and so forth. They brought, at this point, according to this view, and I think this is true because it is supported by other Mesopotamian literature, that they brought to the world knowledge of things like warfare, architecture, cosmetics, all sort of medicine, things like that. So there does seem to be some kind of a knowledge explosion at this point in human history based upon this, again, rebellion in Genesis 6. It is a very limited story. We all have to agree to that. The Genesis 6 doesn't say a lot. We presume that the writer is telling a story that his audience already knew about, because he says in 6:4, these are the famous men. Well, the only reason an author would say that is because he's trying to kind of get the audience to say, oh yeah, that's those guys that we've heard about. So I think they were tapping into a tradition that was well known in the time of, let's say, not just Moses, but then of course the Babylonian captivity, wherein the book of Genesis and the entire Pentateuch was probably edited well into, the history of Israel. That's the second rebellion. The third rebellion, again, I disagreed with Mike on this one. I didn't see it as a rebellion, but let me define it and then throw it out there as an option. That would be the Tower of Babel, Genesis 10 and 11, where mankind, here's Mike's view, mankind united in opposition to Yahweh. Let us make a name for ourselves, they said. And rather than fulfilling God's mandate to spread across the earth, they made a ziggurat that down there in the plain of Shinar that was built for the purpose of worshiping the heavens. And in response to this, God confused their language. We're not sure how. Could have been through a war, could have been through a miracle. We're just not told. And then they scatter because of that language difference. That scattering is actually recorded in Genesis 10, the previous chapter, where all the nations, the table of nations, is given. Mike's view is that this is when, because of this rebellion, whether it be a rebellion of divine beings or certainly a rebellion of mankind, or at least the Babylonians of that period, Nimrod and his city, shall we call it, from Genesis 10, Mike had the view that Yahweh disinherited the nations. He even uses that term. That's possible. Again, I like how Mike, sticks his neck out and goes after a view. What I find interesting is that in Acts 17, Paul refers to this division of the world so that, quote, they may seek Yahweh, seek the Lord. So I think you could read, here's where Mike and I differed a little bit. I think you could read that third rebellion of Genesis 11 as not necessarily a rebellion, but as the means of a king in governing his land, right? So like in Daniel, you have 127 provinces, and Daniel was the head of one of the provinces. Could it be that, the greater the king, the greater the court in that Far Eastern mind? So the idea that Yahweh has a world and he wants to govern that world, and he does it through, because of Genesis 11, he does it through these beings, right? What is possible, I think, is that the purpose of it was to bring the nations back to Yahweh, right? That's my view of Acts 17. So could it be that some of the beings that were given authority over territories were good, were loyal Elohim on the par of a Gabriel and a Michael? So that's where we, again, a lot of discussion here. Obviously, guys, wouldn't we have to admit that all three of these, quote, rebellions, Genesis 3, 6, and 9, as much as they form or 3, 6, and 11, as much as they form a backdrop of the entire Old Testament, they really aren't discussed that much. So especially in the Old Testament. So we have to come out of them saying, well, what do we do with them? And that's where Mike was. That's kind of where I was too on some of it. I've given you my opinion. So let's go off from there.
I'm really curious about.
Oh, yeah, go, Doug.
I'm really curious about Genesis. So you think that only Adam and Eve were not dying, and that when they ate of the fruit, that's when death entered them, but not the world at large. Right?
And again, here's where Mike and I just. What I loved about Mike is he would laugh at you. He'd literally laugh at you when you told him your view. But then he respected it, and so we'd go off and have coffee over it. And my view was that in Genesis 1:26, if you're reading the text for the first time by yourself, when you have all the animals created on day 4 and 5 and so forth, and then he says, "Let us make man in our image," and then and order them. I think it's even in 1:26, to multiply to fill the earth. That in your mind eye, you would have seen a whole bunch of animals and a whole bunch of people. That's just how day 6 would have ended, with a whole bunch of animals and a whole bunch of people. Then, again, in my view, Genesis 2 is the story, a separate story of a hobby farm called Eden, where he creates, or forms actually is the term in Hebrew, a human, and from his side takes out a woman and gives it to him. And then they have, some animals, a hobby farm animals that he names. In other words, he's not naming all the animals of the world. He's naming the animals that were on his farm as a way of showing authority over them. And part of this farm, or this local garden, is that there are 2 trees, and this is very distinct from the rest of the world. And one's a tree of life, one's a tree of knowledge of good and evil. So as long as they eat of the tree of life, from what we can tell, this is, again, looking back on 3:22, kind of reversing 3:22, where God says, no, I'm not going to let you have the tree of life. That as long as they were eating of the tree of life, they were living forever. They were somehow undoing the natural process of carbon, where you die. That's just how you're made. We are made to reproduce ourselves. So when they lost access to the tree of life, went into the regular world where Cain found his wife and such, they entered a world in which there was no tree of life. Thus, they started to die. That's how I viewed it.
Do you think all people came from Adam and Eve, or because you're?
Joshua Swamidass has this book. Have you heard of Joshua J. Swamidass? I forget his first name. Is Joshua? He has a book called The Genealogical Adam and Eve. And he argues as a scientist that you can move all as far as, and I'm not a scientist, so I have to paraphrase here. There is a way to possibly, even scientifically, argue for a link every human down to a pair about 4000 BC. And in other words, it works. So my guess would be we are, because of everything filters into Genesis 6, and Noah, his wife, and his 3 kids and spouses. So all genetics have to, scrunch into those 8 people. And then again, it goes out after that. So your question, are all people related to Adam? Not necessarily. I think you could have, because of just how the genetics works. In other words, Luke 3 does tie Jesus to Adam. Why does he do that? Because not all people are related to Adam. I think that's a possible view that Adam
creates a lot of problems.
I think we froze you, Ron. Oh, there you're back. You're back.
Okay.
Sorry.
It's good.
Well, it's, to me, that really seems to create a lot of problems more than it solves. I mean, first of all, scientifically, there's a lot of evidence that every man that's ever lived has had the same messed up Y chromosome. I'm getting this from
not a
Bradman
scientist, so I don't know.
Well, yeah, I'm not either, but I can read them occasionally. And Bradman and Thomas, some evolutionists, they talk about how every man that's ever lived has had the same Y chromosome from someone who had some event in their genetic code that left a record. And to me, the record sure sounds like the fall.
Yeah,
and then you also have the problem that we're supposed to be in the second Adam, and if there are people out there that are not related to Adam, I don't know. I have some big problems with that. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean,
well, I'm aware of
some other problems, but I think it creates a lot of some different problems.
I'm aware of the verses you mentioned. Again, we all know the verses, right? So it's not a matter of having verses that the other person didn't know. It's how do you get through all the problems on both sides? And there's problems on both sides, right? So where did Cain find his wife? Or why was Cain nervous about going into the world where he would be killed? Those kind of problems to me are solved. Or just reading Genesis 1:26 and 27 the first time through, would you not have the opinion, or at least wouldn't the reader be given the thought that now you have all these humans? But anyway, to me, that's a here nor there kind of a question.
In the Hebrew, God made Adam, he made Adam in his image and in his likeness. So Adam is both a word for the guy, Adam, our dad, and also every human that's ever lived. And humans in Hebrew are called B'nai Adam, right? So we're sons of Adam. I mean, that's specifically how I know that's just how I see it, but it's interesting. I really appreciate hearing a different perspective. That's
so let's go a different direction on this, Ron. What if the first fall is some Nakash being that falls before he tempts Adam and Eve? Could that be the first fall, or does it have to be Adam and Eve? Okay. Because something happened someplace.
Yeah, right.
No. Yeah. But now, so Ron, how do you feel about Enoch? Do you consider it to be interesting or bad?
Yeah, it would be a Gone with the Wind kind of a book in that period where historical fiction use a man's name, Enoch, who is a curious figure, obviously, and giving, in other words, it's the mental furniture. This is how Mike thought of it too. It gives a lot of the mental furniture for that era, 200 BC. How did they interpret their own history, their own stories? And so I don't take everything in Enoch to be history. At the same time, I think it's fun and even helpful to notice how they would have interpreted various parts of their own story. So,
would you agree that angels fell? So Ron, basically, I'm not getting at a third of the angels from Revelation 12. I'm going with maybe 20 or 200 or some little tiny figure of angels falling around the same time as maybe we'll call him the Satan or
why do you have that? Yeah, why do you have that number? What's your thinking?
Because that's an Enoch number.
Okay.
Yeah, the 200 that came down to Mount Hermon. So my perspective on this would be that when Satan went into the garden, he had lots of bad stuff in his heart, which had not yet manifested, had not yet been executed. In other words, God placed him there to protect the garden and those in it, Adam and Eve, and then he betrayed them. And so when they saw him, this Nachash, the Akkadian Mushhushu, Enlil, Satan, all this, the dragon dude, right? When they saw him, they didn't freak out because they're like, "Oh my gosh, who are you?" They knew him. They're like, "Oh yeah, we know you.
I agree.
You're God's prime minister." And so then when he then said, "Hey, did God really say?" They're like, "Well, gee, we could probably trust this guy." And I think that's where it was like taking candy from a baby because they trusted him, right? And that's what's so treacherous about what he did. And so when he did that, that is the moment that he fell, in quotes. Okay. I mean, he had evil in his heart, but he had not yet done the evil.
Did God create? And I'm curious about this. We don't know so much, so I'm just kind of thinking with you. Did God create him with the same, shall we say, freedom as an Adam and Eve, or how did the propensity story work here? Because again, traditionally, this is where I grew up with. Adam and Eve were positively righteous. They weren't neutral. They were positively righteous, and they fell. Satan somehow became evil before Genesis 3. And I've always wondered, and all theologians wonder, how could a being become evil? Under what, let's see, what word do I want here? What would have ever caused a being who knew Yahweh well to want to be evil? It's just bizarre, I mean, when you see perfection, why would you want to be imperfect?
The rabbis go a different direction. The rabbis kind of say Satan and other angels, maybe only a few, were angry because God made human beings and gave them some abilities of some sort. And so the rabbis tend to go that direction, that there was this angst that they felt like, why did you even need to create these? We're fine. We're okay. And that made him angry and he rebelled.
I would tend to broadly agree with that basically Satan and company are created to be the caretakers of the planet, the cosmos, etc. They're the prime ministers, but they're not the king's son. The king's son, he's the one that gets the kingdom. He has the dominion. He has all the authority, whereas the prime minister is busy about taking care of, doing the work of the kingdom, the business.
The analogy works well.
Yeah.
So
I think
basically
Satan was pretty much upset because he was like, look, I'm the one that's got all the authority. I have all the beauty. I have all the wisdom. And now you give the keys to Mr. Dirt. Like, I don't know. That doesn't seem right. And so it wasn't hard to trick them because they trusted him. So that's how I would see it. And Ezekiel 28 says that it was because of your beauty. Because so he thought he was really that awesome. He's like, I really am so amazing. And I'm not going to serve these guys. They can serve me. And I think that's been the basic thing since then. And so Mike and I had him on my show some years ago, and we had a lot of fun because we did similar research and we talked about Enlil, and we went back to a lot of those ancient texts. And so I certainly miss him, but we had some great conversations. That's definitely what was a lot of fun about him, is that good stuff. How
about the Genesis 11 thing? Did you want to get to that one? Because to me, that's
Could we spend a second on the 6 first and then go to 11 in just a minute? So basically, you're advocating that the B'nai Ha-Elohim, the sons of God, typically, Mike would always state that those are the angels, although it is stated otherwise that it could be mankind at times. But basically, they came down, found women to be attractive, had relations with them, produced the Nephilim. They could be the giants, Giganticus, whatever you want to call them. And then those guys got out of control, and then they died during the flood, I assume, right?
That's again, we don't know a lot, but that's the tradition.
Okay. And were they imprisoned?
How do you imprison a spirit? Spiritual bars, as they say, right? I mean, it's got to be figurative speech to some degree. Coming out of, to me, as I read or experience the Greek literature hundreds of years before Christ, where Tartarus is a place well below Hades, right? And it's used by all sorts of secular writers. So I don't sense that the Bible is trying to give us a theology there as much as going along with culture and the idea that somehow the belief was that these beings were punished. If we want to call it, bound or sent to Tartarus, I just have to throw my hands in the air and say, I don't know what that is. And I don't think they knew what it was, but it was a place that they agreed was terrible, terrible pain. And that's where the spirits were sent. So I just take those kind of texts, and because they're not really followed up on, it doesn't seem, except in 2 Peter and Jude, are they really followed up on in the text? I don't sense it. It's not part of the overarching story of what David and a Moses and Abraham were called to do. In other words, I don't think they worried about that part of the story as much as just being loyal to Yahweh in the face of Milcom and Chemosh and the gods. That's where they were centering their attention.
I guess my point is that we have these prison releases in the end times in Revelation chapter 9, a couple of times there, and then in 12. And they seem to be some types of beings from 2-3 different places. And there has to be an imprisonment. Only Enoch talks about it that I can find. Are there any Mesopotamian texts that talk about imprisonment of spirits or demons or fallen angels or anything like that?
Again, I don't know. I mean, I'm happy to. There's 4, right? If you want to go there, it's the Revelation 9 one.
Let's do Revelation 9 later on. Do you have anything that would, because that it's kind of its own little basket. So
Right.
bottom line is there is a Genesis chapter 3. There is a rebellion there, whether it's Hasatan or the Nakash, or there's some kind of a being that rebels there, and Adam and Eve do rebel too. Then there's a chapter 6 rebellion. Seems to be a little bit different types of beings. Then now let's move on to chapter 10 and 11 and talk like you wanted to about there's a rebellion going on there too.
Well, not in my thinking. To me, that's not a rebellion. That's God setting his governors, as it were, over the world. So if they rebel later, maybe, but not necessarily at that moment. Okay. I don't sense a rebellion story in Genesis 11.
Interesting. Doug, do you sense a rebellion? Doug?
I mean, the humans want to worship another deity, clearly, but does the spiritual world rebel? I don't see that.
I mean, I do. I think there is a rebellion there, because I think the very word, Nimrod means let's rebel. So,
yes, but he's a human, remember? So,
true.
Again, he's the one.
He became a Gibor, right? So something definitely happened there. So, I mean, God is amazing, because he can take all things that are messed up and he can use them for his own desires, his own will, and turn them for good eventually. Right. But I definitely think there was
maybe you should define what you mean by rebellion. What happened in the heavens during Genesis 10 and 11? What was, in your view, what was happening in the heavens?
Well, I think they were building a Stargate. I think that was Nimrod's express purpose. We see this in the Akkadian, word Bab El, which means, gate of the gods, which becomes Bab Elim, right? Becomes Babyloni, right? Babylonia. That becomes, it's the gate of the gods. So they were, I think, trying to build a Stargate to some extent. And I think this is why God himself had to come and intervene, right? We see this with the flood, of course, right? Where the flood is a big deal. God himself intervenes. The Tower of Babel, it's a very big deal. God himself intervenes. At the end of the age, Jesus himself, God himself, will come back and intervene, because it's such a huge deal. Of course, there's the first coming of Christ. That was obviously a big deal as well. But there are these punctuated times when God comes and he does something very specific. Right. It's him, right? It's not just an agent, but it's him. And so I think this is where something so radical was about to happen, that he had to come and put a kibosh on it. And I mean, what's interesting about studying Nimrod is, if you only read the biblical text, you won't find Nimrod anywhere in the ancient world. But once you understand that Nimrod, you take those 3 root letters, the Mem, Resh, Dalet, you have the word Marad, which means to rebel. And then we find this in all kinds of names, right? We find it in Marduk. We find it in Nin Urta. We find it in Martu. We find it in the word Mars, or if you speak Spanish, Martes, right? We find this all over the place of this God that was the son, generally, he was the son of Enlil, Satan, and he had the tablet of destinies, right? And so that's what kind of underlying all of these different things. So when we go back to Genesis chapter 3, and we talk about Satan doing this rebellion, well, when you look in the Sumerian and Akkadian texts, you find that this being Enlil is boasting that he stole the authority from Anu, the heaven god, and that he had the tablet of destinies, which gave him the authority and the power to decree fates and to decide the affairs of men. And so whoever held the tablet of destinies was the head honcho. And he says that he had the Anu ship because he usurped it. There was even this thing called the Akitu festival, where they were lauding this whole thing. They were boasting and just kind of goading the heavenly God, and saying that, hey, we took your throne and we're proud of it, and we slew you, right? That's what the whole thing is about. And so the earthly king would then reenact this, and it's all this different fanfare. But this idea that Enlil stole the world. Yeah. And I think Jesus very much agrees with that. He talks about, the king of this world, the God of this world, the ruler of this world. When Satan takes Jesus on top of the Mount of Transfiguration, he says, hey, all of this, all these kingdoms have been delivered to me, and I can give them to whoever I want. And I think that is when he took that. And then Jesus has to buy it back. That's the scroll in the Father's hand in Revelation chapter 5. He has to buy that back. So, so we see this. But anyway, from Enlil, then there's a transference of this tablet of destinies to this god, Ninurta, who is the son of Enlil. He's also known as Marduk, Martu, lots of these different names, but they're all the same individual, which biblically is Nimrod. And the Bible says that Nimrod became a Gibor, right? So, or it says that he began to be a Gibor, right? And it's like, wow, something really weird is going on here. How did he begin to be a Gibor, right? I think that what happened is he and Satan somehow managed to fuse themselves so that Nimrod became a hybrid. What happened in the flood, that didn't work out so well. So I think Satan then focused his attention on somebody who was willing, and he didn't use women this time, but he was able to somehow maybe possess, overshadow, whatever word we want to use, but he was able to infuse his DNA, his seed, into that of Nimrod, and then Nimrod became this larger than life being. And there's all kinds of evidence for it. I mean, you also have Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh seems to be the same individual. There's Pavilsag, same individual. There's just different names. Sometimes they're names, sometimes they're descriptions, sometimes they're epithets, but they're all talking about the same basic individual. And it's because they wanted to create a gateway of the gods. And we even have in the Mesopotamian text, it talks about how they were building this tower, and then the gods were upset because they were building this tower. But it's like, wait, why would your gods be upset? And they're just trying to make sense of this whole thing. And these Mesopotamian texts even talk about the scrambling of languages and so many different things. It's really astounding to put it all together and to take a look at it. So
I appreciate all that background. My question to you was the state of the heavens in Genesis 11. Are they already evil, or how do you see that?
Oh yeah.
Because I think they already were. Whoever was already was. In other words, it wasn't a rebellion at that time. I mean, it was fleshed out in Nimrod going forward, but it wasn't a divine rebellion at that moment. I guess that's all I'm saying.
I got you. Yeah, I mean, I kind of wonder if it was maybe a little here, a little there. I think obviously Satan was the first one, and I think probably some angels joined him. They're like, this is a great idea, and then we have centuries that are going on before the flood. Maybe there were other angels who are like, gosh, these guys are having all the fun down there. Maybe I'll go and join too. I mean, I don't know. This is obviously speculation. We don't have really too much to go on. Sadly, I do wish that chapters 1 through 11 were like a whole lot longer, but
right.
Well, let me throw a phrase at both of you and see what you think. So basically, Nimrod became a mighty hunter in the face of God, Yud-He-Vav-He. What do you think that means? Hunting
I think
what
it before,
in the face?
Oh,
you think it's Lifnei just before?
Lifnei just means before God.
You don't think it's a face thing? Okay. No. It's Panay in there,
Yeah, but Lifnei just means in front of. I mean,
in the presence of. That's how you
right.
See it,
Yeah.
But, yeah. I just see Nimrod as being, as Doug has well explained, a hybrid of some kind that just becomes this
it's probably
famous man in the story, but I don't know. I mean, that's why the text doesn't do much with him, so I just leave it.
It's probably just coincidence that we're trying to do Stargate now with quantum computing and AI and merging man into technology and quantum computers. It's probably all coincidence. This is all just happening.
Let me throw an idea out to you guys, because this is where I was going with Genesis 11. Is it possible that some, to even maybe many of the gods that were given to the 70 nations were good? that they were meant to help bring them back to Yahweh, so that you could have a group of people that are being lorded over by a deity that deep down is loyal to Yahweh. Is that possible?
How do you define loyal? We have 1 Kings 22:22, and the guy that's the most loyal is a deceiving spirit in the mouth of the prophets. So, we don't quite understand what's going on up in God's kingdom.
Yeah. Well, a Gabriel and a Michael come from somewhere, right? There seem to be at least two named loyal beings. I've always wondered, are there more? What's their roles?
Right.
I think it's a great question, and I think these are the kinds of questions that are really fun to explore. I think it's also important for us to say it's okay to have some question marks in the text, and because I've thought about this as well. So in my book, Corrupting the Image, Volume 2, I suggest that when the sons of God were coming down, they saw that the daughters of men were fair. I think that they had not yet fallen. They had not already taken an oath of allegiance to Satan. In other words, they were coming down. They were kind of doing their jobs, as it were. And then they're like, oh, wow, these women are really nice and yada, yada. One thing led to another. And before you knew it, they came down. And then because they crossed the red line, then they could never go back. And, so I think it was kind of a one-way trip, they couldn't do that whole thing again. But it's interesting that, maybe they're I think angels have complete free will, and I don't think that they're ever locked in. I think that they have to always make the right choice. Not that they have to be, I should say this. I think God shows some grace to them as well. I base that on Ezekiel 28, where it says that by the abundance of your slandering, not trading, but slandering, you became filled with sin and violence, and you sinned. And so what I see is that God gave a very long leash to Satan, and I think he, gives a pretty long leash to the other angels as well. Obviously, there is a cutoff point, and only God knows where that is. So, I think that they are very powerful, but they also have free will, just like we do. They're just made of different stuff. We're made of dirt. They're made of spirit stuff, whatever that is, and I think it's pretty cool stuff. So I like your idea.
To what do we, and this is an honest question that I don't have an answer for, to what do we have to, as you say, we wish Genesis 1-11 was more clear, longer, more detailed. Why do you think the text runs the way it does, where we drop into a story of Abraham in Genesis 12 and it gets very telescopic, one family line, and you don't ever feel as though, and I'm not taking anything away from what we've said from 3 to 6 to 11. I do believe that's the background of, from which everything flows. But an honest question here, why do you think from Genesis 12 and on, it seems to be given to a storyline that just loses focus with Genesis 1-11? You know what I'm saying? I think they were, and Abraham was coming out of Babylon and such, worshiping another deity, and so forth. Maybe I'm answering my own question here, but the challenge of the humans from Genesis 12 and on seems to be loyalty to Yahweh and not disloyalty through another divine being. That said, why do Watchers and Nephilim, well, I guess they do show up in Numbers 13.
They do.
Well, you see where I'm going with this? That this,
Yeah.
It seems like this is why the church fathers eventually kind of lost sight of this stuff. They saw a different story emerging, and I'm just curious what you guys do with that.
I would suggest that 1-11 are absolutely critical to understand how we got so messed up, and then the rest of it is the story of redemption, and the redemption, much of it focuses on the coming, the seed, the Messiah, and so it has to do with physical seed. It has to do with promises to a person, Abraham. It has to do with a land, and then what we begin to see little by little, God begins to reveal just a little here and a little there. He reveals the New Jerusalem, right? We begin to discover there's this place called Zion, and it's going to be ultimately it's Jerusalem. God is going to put his stamp of approval there. This is going to put my name forever. And we begin to see all these things unfold. And it's all about ultimately the coming of that promise in Genesis chapter 3, right? So we go back there to Genesis chapter 3, where we have the promised seed of the woman, right? But we also have the seed of Satan that was promised as well, the seed of the serpent. Not the serpent seed theory, as some people suggest, but the Antichrist, the beast, the ultimate bad guy. And so I think it becomes then a story ultimately of two seeds. And I think Genesis 1 through 11 gives us enough that when we go and compare it and contrast it with ancient Near Eastern texts, we can fill in the blanks. We're looking at a negative image when we look at the ancient Near Eastern text. They're telling us the good guys are the bad guys are the good guys. But still, we're like, okay, I have enough here that I can figure it out. And I think ultimately, because God is like, hey, look, yeah, there are these other gods out there. Got it. I want you to focus on me. I think, in my opinion, I think where God focused it on Abram, Isaac, and Jacob and wanted to show this beautiful story of redemption. But
I would say that we're racing through the chapters. As a guy that reads the Torah every year, it's so fast, guys. I mean, the first parsha, Barashith, is just, up to 6:4. That's a ton of information. We can't cover it all. But we have in the middle of it, in chapter 5, we have the generations. We have the 10 patriarchs. And then we have 10 more after that, racing up to Abraham. And then we race up to chapter 22, the Akedah, where he offers his son. This is so messianic. And so it's all a race to the Messiah. I would argue that in chapter 11, we're seeing the false Messiah. I think there's some corruption of Hasatan and Nimrod that is like an antichrist. It's a prefigurement, and it might not be exactly, like what we'll see in Revelation, but there's something weird going on there. There's another fall there, and it's all about the seed. And Daniel kind of reveals it a little bit in chapter 2, verse 43, 44, that they will not mingle, the seed, the seed of man and whatever else the other seed is, they aren't going to mingle.
Hey, let's go to Revelation chapter 9, because this really brings up a very interesting discussion.
Okay, I'll just move through.
Okay. Well,
give me a second here. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm having problems. There it is. Okay. All right. Boom, 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 boom. Whoop. Chapter 9.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. So Genesis chapter 9. What's really interesting, before we get to your slides, I was just going to mention that every Jewish apocalyptus, every first century Jewish apocalyptus believed that the gates of Hades were going to fling wide open, and hordes of evil creatures, demons, were going to come flooding out of there, shooting their arrows, right? So this whole idea that the gates of hell will not prevail against the church, we're going and we're going to beat down those gates. Like, that's the complete wrong idea. It's that the gates of hell, they're going to open up, and the things that come out are not going to prevail against the church. And I think what Jesus did when he took his disciples, I mean, get this, he takes his disciples to Caesarea Philippi. I mean, this is like Las Vegas or worse. Okay. And, he takes them there, and this is a very pagan place. What happens in Caesarea Philippi stays in Caesarea Philippi. And he takes them there, and he has this whole thing where they get to see the gates of Hades. And he says, these gates of Hades will not prevail. And then 6 days later, guess what? He takes them to the top of Mount Hermon, where, according to the book of Enoch, and there was an inscription that was found on top of that. That is where the 200 came down. They took an oath. The very name Mount Hermon literally means the mountain of the oath, or the imprecation, where they take an oath against themselves if they don't do something, right? He then takes them to the top of this mountain, and he has the transfiguration, etc. So I think that's critically important, because we're also told in Revelation that that the beast is going to come up out of the abyss. And I would argue that maybe it isn't Nimrod himself, but it's at least someone who's coming in the spirit of Nimrod, someone who has the embodiment, the power, the authority of Nimrod, who's also a rebel as much. Maybe it's the actual guy, maybe it's not. But, so I think there's all that background that we can really get into. So take it away, Joel.
Okay, so let's read chapter 9. And had to change stage. You see it. Okay, good. Okay, so I'm arguing this is an unveiling or a prison release. Okay, the fifth angel sounded his shofar. That sounds like Joel 2. And I saw a star. Sometimes those stars are named as after angels that had fallen out of heaven onto the earth, and he was given the key to the shaft leading down to the abyss. He opened the shaft of the abyss, and there went up smoke from the shaft like the smoke of a huge furnace. The sun was darkened, and the sky too, by the smoke from the shaft. Then out of the smoke onto the earth came locusts, and they were given power like the power scorpions have on earth. They were instructed not to harm the grass of the earth, or any green plant or any tree, but only the people who did not have the seal of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh on their foreheads. The locusts were not allowed to kill them, only to inflict pain on them for 5 months. And the pain they caused was like the pain of a scorpion's sting. In those days, people will seek death, but not find it. And they will long to die, but death will elude them. I'm saying the prison's being emptied. There's a king angel. I'm sorry I didn't clip the king angel part, but basically he's there. So I'm arguing that could be the Nakash from Genesis 3, that it could be the king of the fallen angels. Ron, comments?
That'd be fine. It works. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say it works. Yeah. I'll just say yes. I mean, I don't mind that idea at all. They're coming from somewhere, and they got there somehow. So I guess that would fit.
So somebody's in prison in the Abuso, and we don't know how many. I mean, it doesn't say it's 10 or 20 or 50 or 200 or 10 billion. I'm arguing it's probably. It does. We'll get there million? In just a little bit. And I'm sorry I didn't clip the next section of chapter 9. Okay, so Doug will probably show us a picture pretty quicker. You
guys don't like my pictures. You just ignore them.
No, they're interesting.
I show you these amazing pictures. And you're like,
they're from Babylon.
Whatever. That's not what I believe. But I can show you a picture. But the fifth and the sixth trumpet are both describing the same creatures, just from slightly different vantage points. But
I would argue that these seem to be located closer to Israel, possibly, maybe Mount Hermon. I don't know. It doesn't list how many of them. Tom Horn and other people like that have argued over the years that they're probably 200, maybe 20, but it doesn't have to be that many. And it would be frightening if these guys popped up out of the abyss and started stinging people for 150 days and you couldn't die. That's horrible. And so I'm wondering, the king angel, he's got two names, Apollyon and Abaddon, right? Mm-hmm. And so basically, it reminds me of the first fall in the first place of Genesis 3, that you've got the top guy, the Nakash, and then possibly maybe 20 or 200 other angels with him that pop out of the abyss at this point in time.
All right, well, yeah, so I'm just trying to put this all together. Are you saying that Abaddon or
Apollyon
has been in prison since Genesis 3 until now here? Is that how it would work?
I'm trying to argue that, yes.
Okay. Who did Jesus meet in the temptation then, in your opinion? I'm just trying to put all this together.
That's the problem with it. You're right. It doesn't work very well. I mean, there has to be somebody that he meets, Hasatan, Okay. But the problem is, you guys know it's a title. And so it could alternate between any one of these fallen angels.
Okay. I mean, it works. I'm I always feel like I'm in next week's weather forecast where I can say, okay, I guess, and then I have to wait until it gets here anyway.
I know, but this is scripture and it will occur, you know, and it's going to be rather frightening, you know?
Right.
Joel, I'm curious why you think it's not 200 million when it says it's 200 million.
We're going to get there. Don't worry. That'll be the next slide.
That's after the sixth trumpet. They're not the same, I don't believe, Dr. Doug.
I don't think they're the same.
Exactly the same. 100%.
No, they're not.
Yes, they are.
No, they're not.
Yes, they are. Okay, look.
You're getting me interested now. We're talking prophecy, not ancient history.
Yeah, but dude, I mean, don't be so. Look at this. Look at this thing right here. Okay, this is the god Nergal.
Who's going to tell Doug that he's breaking up?
God doesn't want him to say what he's trying to say right now.
Right.
This happened the last time, guys. When we had Ron on, I was having all sorts of problems.
Hey, take down his slide.
I don't know what.
Okay, Doug, say it one more time.
No, I'm here.
You froze.
Okay. So if you take I know. So if you take the fifth trumpet and the sixth trumpet and you superimpose them over one another, this is exactly the creature you get. This is the god Nergal. He's the god of the underworld. Nergal is also Nimrod, Ninurta. Okay, so and this is essentially the same as Enlil.
It's a black screen, my friend. It's not showing up for everybody.
It's showing up for me.
And for me.
It is for us, but not on my
phone now. That's odd.
Well, I don't know what to do about that.
I don't either.
Well, here, let's just remove it and add it. How about now?
Okay.
Well,
anyway, so this creature, you can see that it has a man's head, it has a lion's head, it has wings, it's got basically a horse's body, which is what these locusts are. They're horse-like. It has eagle's talons, it has a scorpion's tail, and it has a serpent head phallus. Okay, so that is everything, 100% of everything that is described in Revelation chapter 9. And I'm surprised you guys don't bother to take a look at this stuff, because you could say it's ancient history and doesn't count, but it does count. This is exactly what they thought was going to come out of the abyss. And here we have it. I mean, it's because obviously the guys that were etching this stuff were somehow in contact with the spiritual realm, and they could see into that realm to some degree. So now you tell me why this isn't a perfect representation of what's coming out of the abyss, because
we agree on the fifth trumpet. You're just trying to merge two.
Yeah, not on the sixth.
But when I do that, this is the creature that we get. So how can you just flippantly ignore it? Just because you want to?
No, because the fifth trumpet's open, and then a sixth trumpet with different beings and different numbers.
But they're
in sequence. See, and again, this I'll tell you if you give me a minute. The fifth trumpet is the first woe. The second woe, the sixth trumpet's then open, and then we know that the second woe is not over until the two witnesses are killed. They're caught up. A great earthquake happens, and that is the second woe. So this is all happening at the very, very end of this stage. I know you don't like the fact that the two witnesses dying in the earthquake begins, that says this is the second woe in the timeline. So we're way towards the end of the age now. So you've got to somehow fit in the sixth trumpet for a 3.5 year period to have the two witnesses testifying back prior to there too. So again, I just believe that the trumpets are sequential. And then once the fifth trumpet blows, it's a 5-month period. And then the sixth trumpet blows, and it's a different trumpet judgment that's being blown and opened. In other words, then that happens. So, I'm not merging the fifth and the sixth trumpet. I mean, I agree with you that what what you're showing in your research and in your book, and you bring out all these shows, I'm not denying that at all. My wife's telling me to all be nice to y'all.
And I just enjoy hearing it. So
yeah. And Ron, we're not going to pin the tail on the Antichrist donkey tonight, okay? So you don't have to give us your eschatology. Just we want your intelligent, creative input on possibly do these theories work together? These prisons, they're released 3 times in Revelation. Could they be related to Genesis? And so let's go ahead and thank you, Doug, and add this back to the stage. So now we've got the 6th angel did sound, and I heard a voice out of the 4 horns of the altar of gold that is before God. So it's up in heaven, saying to the 6th messenger who had the trumpet, loose the 4 messengers, angelos again, who are bound at the great river Euphrates. That sounds like Babylon to me. And loosed were the 4 messengers who had been made ready for the hour, the day, the month, the year, that they might kill the third of men. And the number of the forces of the horsemen is 2 myriads of myriads, 200 million. And I heard the number of them. And thus I saw the horses in the vision, and those sitting upon them having breastplates of fire and jacinth and brimstone. And the heads of the horses are as heads of lions. Out of their mouths proceeded fire and smoke and brimstone. Could they be Nephilim? I don't know. By these 3 were the third of men killed from the fire and from the smoke and from the brimstone that is proceeding out of their mouth. What are these guys?
So there's another prison? What's up with the prison?
I'm saying 2 prisons. I'm saying this. There's a prison 1, the Abuso. Prison number 2 seems to be... does it say that?
Is that what the text says?
The text doesn't tell us in chapter 9, verses 1 through 14, that it's a specific location. It's just the Abusa, wherever that happens to be. This does give a location. It's the Euphrates.
These 4 generals or whatever they are, these angels,
angelos.
They seem to be like generals. They're the ones. Okay, sure. Angelos, I know. But obviously they're on the bad team. They have a special role, but you have 200 million that are coming out. But
Ron has done a good job of stating that sometimes these angels or fallen angels seem to have their little regions that they manage, and they could be good or bad or indifferent. They just manage those regions. And so that sounds like 1 Kings 22:22, where, one of the guys steps forward and all be a lying spirit in the mouths of the prophet. So we don't know if he's a good guy, bad guy, he ends up doing bad, but it seems like God has people, or fallen angels or angels, doing his tasks for him. And these are the 4 guys.
Who are the 200 million?
I'm arguing that they are related to the Genesis 6 story.
Okay. How does that relate to the 200 that came to Herman then?
I would say the 200 are fallen angels. These are the Nephilim, the departed spirits of the Nephilim.
Okay. So
manifesting.
All right. I don't know. I'm just curious. Yeah.
There is no answer to this. We wanted you to come on and, give it a good shot. Let's go back to this one. I'll kind of show you. So basically what I'm saying is it seems like there's a rebellion in Genesis 3, and this Nakash shows up and causes the, the fall or a rebellion. Okay. Mm-hmm. It seems like it's related to this King Apollyon, Abaddon from Revelation chapter 9. It seems like they're kind of related, and it seems like there's proxy number 1 and release number 1, and there has to be this. Heiser stated it this way: there's going to be a final showdown. There's going to be the big showdown. Mm-hmm. And this seems to be setting it up. We have to release this Nakash at some point in time. Genesis 6 seems to be the Nephilim, and that seems to be more related. You can see the arrows, it's poorly done, but basically it seems like it's Babylon, it just seems like that's the case. It's so.
Well, the way you have your arrows there, you have the Genesis.
Yeah, they're
6 going
bad.
down to
I
Revelation.
goofed it up. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
Genesis 10 should go up. I'm sorry. Genesis 6 should go down. And so the fallen angels, and I'm saying Hasatan, and now Heiser is very strict on this one. He never believed that there were many fallen angels, that this situation in Revelation 12 is a future event where 1/3 of the angels fall. And we haven't hit that yet, according to how I think Heiser would think. Do you agree, Ron?
Yeah, I was looking at Mike's view of the Revelation 12, and I wrote down my summation of it. Where'd I put it? I don't have it in front of me. I don't know. I always took it to be when Jesus came to earth, the standing over the child that's born, that this would be what happened 3.5 year ministry of Jesus, mostly. In other words, it's probably happening all 30 years, but you were seeing demons manifesting themselves in the ministry of Jesus, which was so unusual compared to the Old Testament. You didn't have demon possessions, as it were. I think that's because they were simply doing their role. They were playing out their role. But then when the lights come on, all the cockroaches scatter. That's how I see the Gospels. And so a man in Mark 1 is sitting in a synagogue minding his own business, and Jesus walks in and he says, "I know who you are." And in other words, you have this moment of the sides showing who they are in an otherwise inconspicuous moment of just having a Saturday morning service. Now you get this showdown, and you have these showdowns all along the way. And then Mark 3:11, at which point after here's my view of the temptation account. It's when Jesus told Satan to get in line, that he won that battle that day and was able to tell Satan to follow me, to get in line. Get thee behind me is the same phrase for follow me to Peter. In other words, your role, Satan, is to be behind me, to get in line. And so that from then on, Mark 3:11, whenever he met a demon, they would get down and worship him, as though the demons knew their time was short and that this was God's son. That's my quick rendition of that. Am I answering your question? I forget which question I'm answering.
Let's try it this way. So
Yeah.
I agree with you. There's some kind of a time frame. There's some kind of a deal going on. There's an agreement between these demons and our Father in heaven. So when Yeshua arrived at the other side of the lake on the Gadarenes territory, there came out of the burial caves 2 men controlled by demons, so violent that no one dared travel on that road. They screamed, "What do you want with us, Son of God? Son of God, B'nai Ha Elohim, have you come to torture us before the appointed time?" Now, some distance from them was a large herd of pigs feeding. The demons begged him, "If you are going to drive us out, send us into the herd of pigs." "All right, go," he told them. So they came out and went into the pigs, whereupon the entire herd rushed down the hillside into the lake and drowned. So they didn't get a good deal. So the bottom line is that it seems as though God's got a plan here, and there seems to be a timetable. I mean, appointed time, and torture us. What do you think Heiser would think of the word torture us?
I don't know. I mean, I had my view, and
okay, give us yours.
Yeah, Isaiah 24, Jeremiah 10, verse 11, that the gods coming out of the story, again, maybe this is as early as, well, I don't know when this starts. Again, by the time you get to Genesis 11, the story is set. And so between Genesis 11, let's say, and Jeremiah 10, Isaiah 24, Zephaniah 2, there is a prediction that the gods will be destroyed. So somehow, somewhere in there, and again, I just think we don't have enough to go on here. There is a prediction, Psalm 82, that the gods will, a certain number of them, we don't have a percentage, but a certain number of them will be punished for their role in what they have done to human beings and led them astray. And Psalm 82 kind of describes that to me. So that's what I think the demons are saying to Jesus, that they know at the end of time, based on some of the latter prophets, that their rebellion will be shut down and they will be punished for what they've done. That's what I mean by it.
So why? Is he trying to expose them, embarrass them? Are we going to be judging them, or are we just witnessing whatever he's doing as he releases all of these beings from, I believe, 3 different prisons. What's the point of it?
What's the point of which of the final punishment?
Releasing them.
Oh, I see. That's just his decision. I don't know if that's necessarily. Yeah, I don't know why God's doing what he's doing. I don't have an answer.
Do you guys all agree with me that those are releases?
It's for judgment.
Yeah, but I think they get out. I mean, if somebody gets out of prison, were they let go or did they make a break for it? And I think we could, we could really recast.
Okay.
I mean, okay, sure. God is in control of everything. We understand that. Okay. But at a lower level, I think, we're told in the text that this star having fallen from heaven, he's given the key, whether he sort of steals it, it's a 4-finger discount or something, or 5-finger discount, or God's like, here you go, here's the key. I tend to think it's more like Satan trying to get his reinforcements, that he's trying to get as big of an army as he possibly can, because he knows what's coming. He knows that the King of Kings is coming back to take back his throne, and he is not going to go quietly. He wants to get everybody on his side. He needs to get all the guys from prison. He's got to get, because they're big and mighty, he needs to get everybody turned into a Nephilim so that they can also fight, and then, pull out all the stops here.
But it's a horrible marketing strategy, because these minions that are released, they touch no one that has the seal of God on their forehead. They're used for judgment. I mean, just like you had the hornets back in the Torah, where the hornets are going in, and in other words, Yah will send the hornets. These are like demon bugs, supernatural hornet bugs that they're going to be released. And I believe the reason they're released is for judgment on those who do not have the seal, and to bring repentance. In other words, there is still time to repent for these people. They're not killed. Yeah. They're suffering obviously extreme pain, but ultimately I look at all of what's happening in Revelation as the last chance for Yah to get their attention and get mankind to repent.
But there's also something else happening there, Scott, because it says that in those days men wanted to die and death fled from them. So it's not business as usual, right? Something has happened to the people that are getting stung.
We agree.
They can no longer die. And I would argue that they have become Nephilim. They have been transformed, and there's no going back for them. So, I think the people that cannot die are the ones that have taken the mark of the beast. That's what I would suggest.
Well, but I used to say that until I read the text, and it said that they sting everybody who does not have the seal of God. In other words, the text does not say, I'm just telling you what
I guess I should read the text.
The text does not say that.
Yeah, I know, brother. We're both reading the text here, man. But we're seeing different perspectives.
But you're inserting the mark of the beast into it. And I'm just saying it says they will torture everybody.
I understand that. But what I'm also suggesting is that these people cannot die. So something has happened. Yes, I'm filling in the blank, but the blank seems to take me to Revelation chapter 13 quite specifically. So I don't know. Why don't they die? I mean,
I agree with you. It's an interesting question.
Okay. Well, maybe
Ron. We know they don't
die, Ron. You're the guest.
Yeah, poor Ron. We dragged him into this.
All the answers, buddy.
No, this reminds me why Israel didn't have a theology. They had a story. In other words, they have a family who doesn't agree on everything, and so they kept minority and dissenting opinion alive within the group. That's what I love about Jews. They don't kick out people they don't agree with. They say, join the family. Let's add this to the story because it's possibly going to be the right one, but we don't know.
Hey, I'll buy you a coffee afterwards.
We can.
Well, and this is sometimes it's frustrating for me because I'm like, God could have added a couple more details, a little here, a little there, and we would have been like golden on so many things, but he leaves out just enough of the text. We're just like, oh my gosh, I mean, the whole woe is like, okay, I'm like, yeah, that's challenging.
Yeah.
But
sometimes he gives us the text. We ignore it.
Well, yes, but we all ignore it, my friend, and you ignore things too, like the things that I keep showing you, because they just don't fit into your understanding. And I'm trying to say, look, this is spot on. If I couldn't figure out what the creatures look like in Revelation chapter 9. I kept thinking like a manticore, but then I stumbled across Nergal. And this is a Kudura stone from 1200 BC, blew my mind. But this is the classic picture that's kind of been evolving a little bit over the years of the Anzu bird, of Satan, Enlil. It's all the dragon in one various form or another, but it's all the dragon and manifestations of the dragon. And so, this is, again, where, we can look at this side of the story and it starts to make sense, but then there's this side of the story. So I'm trying to make it so that we can all say yes.
We all get that once you threw up there.
No, we're not going to say yes. There's too much going on tonight.
It didn't have a lion's head.
Yeah, and I showed you the lion's head.
Okay.
A man's head and a lion's head. Just a coincidence, I'm sure. But whatever. Well, Ron, gosh, you've been a great guest.
Well, can we finish? We haven't even gotten to chapter 12 yet, guys. Oh, you got to run. Let's finish 12 and then a couple more minutes, okay? So let me just grab this and pop it up. And a great sign, possibly an asteroid, you never know, was seen in heaven, and a woman arrayed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. Virgo reclines every fall around Rosh Hashanah. And being with child, she doth cry out, travailing in pain to bring forth. And there was seen another sign in the heaven, and lo, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his head 7 diadems, and his tail doth draw a third of the stars of heaven, and he did cast them to the earth. And the dragon did stand before the woman who was about to bring forth, and when she may bring forth her child, he may devour. And she brought forth a man child, who is about to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. And caught away was her child unto God and his throne, and the woman did flee to the wilderness, where she hath a place made ready from God, and there they may nourish her a days, 1,260, 1,260 days. And there came war in the heaven. Michael and his messengers did war against the dragon, and the dragon did war, and his messengers, Angelos, Melachim, and they did not prevail, nor was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast forth, the old serpent, who is called Devil, the adversary, who is leading astray the whole world. He was cast forth to the earth, and his messengers, Angelos again, were cast forth with him. Ron, comments?
I've always taken this to be the scene at Jesus' birth, and that the war breaking out in heaven is basically lived out in front of us in the Gospels. So like verse 9, cast to the earth. And then as you will keep reading, they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb. That this is my opinion, that this is telling the story of Jesus' lifetime. And then at the end of 12 is where I would show up in the story. He knows his time is short, that I'm living through that, the devil having come down to you moment in verse 12. So,
and definitely the Satan showed up during Yeshua's time. Did Ron freeze? No, I think you're back, Ron.
Okay,
you froze for a moment.
And how much did I get out there? Did you hear my?
You got 3 sentences in.
Oh, is that all? Oh my goodness. I always have taken this to be the story of Jesus' ministry himself. So the male child, right? So then the war breaking out in heaven, verse 7 would be during Jesus' lifetime, what he experienced with, battling demons and such. Cast to the earth, verse 9 would be, again, the story of the Gospels. They overcame him, verse 11, which you're going to get to, would be like the Luke 10:18, where Jesus tells Satan to get behind him. And then I would come into the story. My lifetime would be at the end of verse 12. The devil has come down to you having great wrath because he knows his time is short. So that's how I've taken it, but I'm certainly willing to hear other options. So
Doug?
Well, since Scott isn't here, we don't have to talk about the man-child, which is great.
That's a blessing, guys.
It is a blessing. I get so tired of that theory, but nevertheless, this has been a lot of fun, Ron. I'm glad that we can just sit around and converse and chew on
One
it.
more verse, you know, then we're done. One more, please.
You're taking all the fun out of it, dude.
I know. Let me just do this one. Okay. So basically, I saw 3 unclean spirits that looked like frogs. They came from the mouth of the dragon, from the mouth of the beast, and from the mouth of the false prophet. They are miracle-working demonic spirits which go out to the kings of the whole inhabited world to assemble them for the war of the great day of Adonai Tezvaot. So that's Revelation 16:12 through 13. So it seems like these demonic spirits are gathered, all of the rulers, all of the potentates, and their armies to a place. Doug has an opinion of where that place is. It doesn't have to be Armageddon, but it does seem to be a spiritual gathering. Ron, any comments about that?
I totally agree. I take Meredith Klein's view on this one, that Har Moed is a more likely Hebrew behind what comes across as Armageddon. So what verse would that be? That 16:16, they gathered, this is how I read 16:16, they gathered them together to the place called in Hebrew Har Moed, which would then be recalling the mountain of assembly of Ezekiel.
You're doing that. Interesting. Okay.
We're agreeing that there is in fact, that's what sets up for 17. Then the seventh angel poured out his bowl. It's done. So in my version, that right before God says it's finally over, you have the previous verse, the final, all the masses of demonic forces versus God himself, led by Jesus. So,
Doug?
Well, I mean, I've talked about this on the show, but I take the Armageddon to be 3 words, which is Armageddon, which is the Valley of the Judgment of the Sheaves, and we see a lot of imagery of harvesting. Cast in your sickle, for the harvest is ripe. We're told. It says in Revelation 14, Joel chapter 3, etc. And so I think I think Armageddon is a place that does not yet currently exist. It will exist when Jesus puts his feet on the Mount of Olives and it splits in 2. That will be the Valley of the Judgment of the Sheaves. And, so that's where it's going to be. That will be a repeat of the Red Sea crossing, but this time through land, not through water. It's right next door to the Valley of Jehoshaphat, the valley where God judges. So I don't think that Har Moed works, because I think it leaves out the noon, and I think that's a big part of the word. And I think it does better than what some people do, but I really think that like the mountain of Megiddo, that doesn't work. We all know that doesn't work, because if you go to Megiddo, there's no mountain, right?
It's pretty flat.
There's no mountain,
Right.
I'm like, that's the most glaring problem with that theory, is that there's no mountain at the mountain of Megiddo, right? There's a valley. So it cannot be there. It was just laziness on the part of early interpreters, I suppose. I think Har Moed is a decent attempt, but I think it falls short still. I think making either way, we still have a few linguistic challenges, no question. But we have a word that does not exist in any Hebrew script or any Hebrew text. It's only in the book of Revelation. And so then we have to try to figure out, how do we parse this thing? It tells us it's Hebrew, so we know that. Right. So how do we figure it out? And I think Armageddon does a much better job of interpreting this, and it puts everything where it needs to be, which is going to be in Jerusalem. We're told that in Joel chapter 3. We're told that in Zechariah 12:14. We're told this, of course, in the Gospels, right? We're told this in Revelation itself. We're told that it's going to be in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the final place. That's where the final battle is going to take place. So that's how I would. That's how I would do that.
By the way, do you think Paul knew this stuff? Where was Paul
Yeah, absolutely.
on the his understanding of the finalities, as it were?
Well, I think he would read Zechariah and he'd read Joel, and he knew that the end times battle was going to take place in Jerusalem. I mean, again, this is where I think some of our well-meaning Christian brothers who take Ezekiel 38 and they're like, oh, that's talking about, some battle before the rapture. And I think they're just, I mean, God bless them, but I think they're all wet. I think Ezekiel 38 and 39 are exactly the same battle. We talk about Armageddon, we talk about the beast. It's the same thing, same exact thing. It's just Gog was the name of the bad guy there. If you go back into Sumerian, you find that Gog means death or enmity. That's a beautiful, that's a perfect, not beautiful, but it's a perfect name for Satan. We know that he was the god of death, etc. And we're told that this is all going to happen in Israel, on the mountains of Israel. Doesn't specifically say Jerusalem, but hey, the capital of Israel is Jerusalem, So, it'd be kind of like saying, like, if you invade America and you take over Texas, have you conquered America? Well, no, you've conquered part of it. But, when you conquer DC, well, then you've conquered America, essentially. And I think that's the same idea here, is that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel, and whoever is going to try to conquer Israel needs to take Jerusalem. And so anyway, that's how I would put all that together.
So tie it in a bow. Basically, you've got 3 rebellions. You've got 3 prisons, possibly. Doesn't exactly state that, but we have 3 releases of those prisons in Revelation 9 and 12. And then we seem to have these demonic spirits that go out and entice the kings of the whole inhabited world to assemble for this big war. So it seems like God is getting them to show up. He's enticing them, just kind of like 1 Kings 22:22. Who's going to entice Ahab to go out and lose the battle? So I'm hoping that made sense, people. Do you guys have anything to add to the bow?
So are we all agreeing then that 1616 is the final moment before God puts a kibosh on demonic rebellion? Is that what you're all saying? 1616?
That's only me. I'm not putting words in anybody's mouth.
That's me. That's what I'm saying.
Oh, you would say that. Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
That's the final battle. That is...
Okay.
That's the final... how can it not be the final battle? Gosh, if Armageddon isn't the final battle, then what the heck are we talking about? I think there's a lot leading up to it. There's a lot of preparation. There's a lot of stage setting. Yeah. But Armageddon is the ultimate battle between Jesus and the forces of darkness led by the beast. So, it all culminates. And then, of course, we see this again in Revelation chapter 19, where it talks about the beast and the false prophet were gathered together with the nations. That's at Armageddon. It's all happening there. And this is why I take Revelation thematically instead of absolutely chronologically. I'm not disagreeing that I'm not saying there's no chronology in Revelation. I just think that the majority of these chapters are laid out in a thematic sense. And we see this throughout Scripture. We see it again and again and again throughout Scripture that, like in the book of Isaiah, there's a lot of stuff that seems to be kind of out of sequence, but maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe they weren't trying to write in a sequence. And I don't think that Revelation is entirely sequential. It has some, but a lot of it is just themes. It's, I don't know, if you were like writing your autobiography, you could start with day 1, but you could also say, okay, I'm going to talk in this chapter about my marriage. In this chapter, I'm going to talk about my kids. And in this chapter, I'm going to talk about my work. They're all happening kind of at the same time, but I'm going to take a chapter to focus on a theme so that I can focus on that without just giving you, here's day 1, day 2, day 3. It's kind of boring. And so I think that's a stylistic thing that, God presented the material to John in that way so that it becomes easier. Revelation 11 is all about the two witnesses. It's not to say that they're not in anywhere else in the book. They're all over it. But the focus in chapter 11 is on the two witnesses. The focus in 13 is on the beast. But we know that the beast is doing all kinds of bad stuff. So that's how I read it. And, of course, the way God laid it out has led to all kinds of, discussions and debates. And, so we can all ask him when we get there, why'd you do that?
And I've learned a lot tonight, guys. Thank you.
Really? Seriously? You like
Revelation? This? Revelation. I have avoided my life as much as I can. I have a Bible study I've had for 15 years with a group of about 24 folks, and they keep saying, "Can we do Revelation?" And I keep saying, "No, we haven't done Hosea yet." So I've tried to avoid the book as long as I can.
Hey, we've got a couple of questions before we end it.
Sure.
So we don't have to go into this completely, but here says huge problems. What lineage did some people come from, if not the first two people? I don't know if you want to take that, but I would tend to agree with Bahir. He goes on to say Hava, or Eve, is the mother of all per Genesis 3:20, and Adam named his wife Eve because she was the mother of all of the living. So
yeah, I would just say that's his name for her, his family. That's where all his kids came from. So that's what I take that verse to mean. What was the first question? Do all lineage?
Well, I think the question is, where did the other people come from, if not from the first two people?
Oh, well, they're created by God. God made them in Genesis 1:26 and 27.
Yeah, I've got real problems with that idea too. I mean, I strongly disagree with you, but it's fun to chew on it.
Sure.
Yeah, so let's see here.
And he created them in his image. In other words, those people out there are still in the image of Elohim.
Yeah, but I don't know. I think they all got to be related to Adam, because we're now in the second Adam. Like, that's the whole point, is there was the first Adam, then there's the second Adam, but it's okay. We don't have to agree on it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Let's see. So she says, I'd say that because heavenly beings have free will, they will have potential rebel at any time. So who really knows how many rebellions? Okay, maybe. And then Brenda says, does anyone know or think Nimrod could be the first beast and come back to life? Any thoughts, Ron? I have an opinion, but I want to defer to you. Yeah. I think it's very possible that Nimrod could come back to life. I think he could be maybe a possessing spirit in the Antichrist. So what I see as the Antichrist or the beast is a man that's going to be alive, that is birthed toward the end of the age, obviously, and he might be possessed by Satan. He might be possessed by the spirit of Nimrod, or it could be that his character, his spirit, is very much an embodiment. It's almost a carbon copy of the same type of spirit, the same attitude, characteristics, behavior that Nimrod embodied. So, I have a question mark whether it's the exact same person or if it's just pretty darn close, and I have no way to answer that.
Yeah, it's a good possibility, but don't know.
Yeah. But I do think that they're very much related in their purpose and in their character. So, wow. Well, thank you, Ron. This was really a lot of fun. We appreciate
wonderful,
you coming
Ron.
on the show.
This is fun.
Enjoyed it, so
good. Yeah.
Let's do it again.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, maybe this fall.
Where can people find you? Where can they find you?
How do they find you?
Divine Council Worldview Podcast is what I do weekly with Mike Chu. And we're following on the footsteps of Dr. Mike Heiser, and keeping alive his Naked Bible podcast that he had. And now this is our version of the same idea. So we just finished Genesis, and now we're into John. Verse by verse, just working our way through the text.
I think I've seen you on TikTok. Aren't you on TikTok? Or is somebody stealing your work and putting it on TikTok?
If they are, I don't know about it.
Oh,
kind of like, I'm sure that happened to Mike too, where
people
just use it. So that's fine. I'm not sure who would have done that. Yeah, I don't know.
All right, I'll look more carefully next time. So yeah, I've seen you on some other platforms, maybe some video shorts too, in terms of YouTube.
Yeah, I was just on another. We were talking atonement, and that's where I've spent most of my theological career, is on atonement issues.
Okay,
so
sure,
very cool,
wonderful,
awesome. Well,
not
thank
much
you
on
again.
Nimrod.
Not much on that.
Everyone, thank you. We're so glad that you joined us. Hey, if you haven't joined yet, we have a Telegram group, and you should join us. It's a lot of fun. So I'll put the link in the description, and I hope you guys will join us there. If you want to support this, you can go to patreon.com/Doug Hamp. Give as much or as little as you want. It's totally up to you, but it really does make a big difference. Thank you for helping to support this show. We could not do it without your support. And of course, like, subscribe, and all that good stuff. So until next time, God bless you guys. Stay in the Word.